right, guys, thank you for that carrier update. It's time now to check in with our Tuesday community segments. We've got Mary O'Connell here talking all things 3PL. Mary, thanks for joining us this morning.
Anytime, guys. There's no place I'd rather be on a Tuesday morning.
The place that we'd rather be as well, talking to you. You got an interesting subject here coming up, talking about the carbon footprints in California. And give us a little bit of an overview of what Gavin Newsom is looking at when talking about carbon footprints, especially for large companies.
Yeah, so basically this week we really kind of dove into what that new regulation in California is going to look like, and kind of, how, if you're a 3PL helping large shippers, how you can kind of be as an advantage. So the new regulation came out that said any large shipper, I don't specifically know the exact requirements. I think you have to earn $1 billion or something. I might be wrong on that, so don't quote me on that. But if you are a large shipper, you have to now disclose your Scope 3 emissions. It doesn't necessarily mean that, someone's coming after you, that they're tracking it. They just want it disclosed. Kind of like, in your financial quarterly reports, you have to disclose your financials. That's all that they're asking people to do for their carbon emissions. But they've gone all the way up from Scope 1, 2, and now 3. So I know that the SEC is still kind of waiting, or they haven't really released how they would like it disclosed, how they would like Scope 1 and 2 disclosed. But California has gone ahead and said, you're going to need to disclose all of them all the way up through Scope 3. So that's all that the regulation is saying, is just that, hey, now's the time you need to disclose your carbon emissions.
So at this point in time, it can be kind of tricky to get a true handle on your Scope 3 emissions, especially if you're someone who doesn't have the best visibility into their supply chain. If you're a shipper and you have manufacturing practices, maybe they're scattered across the globe. Maybe you've got some going on in Mexico, some going on in China, some going on in Vietnam. It can be really difficult if you don't have a full pulse on every single piece of your manufacturing process to truly understand those Scope 3 emissions. A lot of that relies on technology. So what type of technology options are out there for folks who are now looking to work at this type of disclosure? And it's not just for shippers, right? Your 3PLs also have to make this type of disclosure as well, which adds yet another layer.
Yes, it absolutely does add more layers, and it makes it a little bit more complicated, because then you're like, well, if I'm disclosing my Scope 3 for using this carrier, and that carrier's already included it in their Scope 1 and 2, like, how do we know that we're not overlapping? And that's just some stuff that, since this is something that is so early on in its stages, we're going to have some duplicate reporting, and it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's not the end of the world. As we kind of iron out some of these processes and get everyone on board, that's when some more things will come down, that maybe your emissions won't be so bad, because you don't have to count Scope 3 if they've already counted Scope 1 and 2 or something like that. So that's something that we get to look forward to as this progresses. But when it comes to the technology aspect behind it, it's absolutely crucial and vital, because you don't want to get out a pen and paper and go around and ask everyone, how much fuel did you use this week? How much trash did you generate this week? How much was our electricity bill? Something like that. That's not reasonable. That's not practical at all. So you want to have technology there. Not only that, because you have to kind of some people don't have anything in place for this. So building a system from something that already is, from technology that is, designed for this, is absolutely crucial, because you don't want to have to sit there and, rebuild the wheel. You just want to kind of steal the wheel from your neighbor next door and put it on your car.
So let's back up just a little bit for people that don't necessarily know, or maybe haven't caught up with this as well. What is Scope 1 and Scope 2 versus Scope 3 emissions? And then as well, at the same time, what challenges are companies having in trying to comply with this and being okay with the legislation that, and certainly in California, that Governor Newsom has put together?
So Scope 1 and 2 are emissions that your business directly creates. So that's going to be like your electricity bill. If you're a carrier, your fuel consumption, the miles on the road, all those carbon emissions from trucks. If you're a 3PL with warehousing, it's going to be, your warehouse vehicles, whether that's your forklifts, your yard jockeys, you name it. It's going to be things that you can directly control, that, happen in the cost of you doing business. Some people call them direct emissions. So That is going to be scope 1 and 2, and those are going to be your direct emissions, things that your business directly creates as a result of, this is cost of doing business. These are the emissions that you create. Scope 3 are going to be those indirect emissions. So most commonly for 3PLs and freight brokers, it's going to be the carriers, the carriers output or their carbon emissions from their trucks when they run loads that you specifically book them on. Those are kind of the type of scope 3 ones, the indirect things that because you hired someone to do a service for you, they're kind of their emissions. It gets real hairy real quick, but that's the easiest, most kind of best example, just without getting too far down the rabbit hole, is things that you indirectly cause. So that is why scope 1 and 2 are typically much easier, because that's something that you can get your hands around and you can say, okay, I know exactly how much energy we use across all plants. I know, I kind of know what we're looking at when it's just your business. And that's a great place to start. I'm not saying that you have to be completely perfect and have everything ready to go tomorrow. Starting with scope 1 and 2 is going to be so much easier, and that's going to give you a good benchmark to say this is something that we know we can control, and this is something that we can improve on year over year or month over month or whatever. That's where you're going to want to set the biggest part of your goals. Scope 3 is going to be tricky, and it's going to be incorrectly reported for a while, and that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to, you're trying your best. That's all you can ask. So it's really just about making little improvements every day. The thing with sustainability initiatives is you don't have to be perfect overnight. You just have to be a little bit better every day.
So, of course, for 3PLs, their biggest reporting, especially in California, is going to come from a shift from those emissions vehicles to year zero emission vehicles, which are things that are also being legislated in as necessity starting in 2024, of course, with the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. So with this, is there going to have to be a now shift in the 3PLs reporting, of course, any freight that they book in California versus any freight that they book out of California that moves into California? Is that going to be something where that hard line is going to be very difficult to draw? Because, of course, commerce is interstate. It's going to be difficult to track that just because you go over the border of California, then you have to report those emissions.
I think technically, as the legislation is written now, is that I think only shippers who are based in California have to do this. So if you're driving into California as a 3PL or another shipper, I don't think that's going to be, I don't think you should disclose all the emissions that you put out in California. However, it would not be a bad idea to start if you have nothing, if you have absolutely zero, if you have nothing, you're like, never reported an emission in my life. I would maybe just start. Just start with 1 and 2. Just give it a whirl, because more often than not, we've seen this throughout countless pieces of legislation. It starts in California, and then slowly other states start to adopt it, and then naturally everyone kind of has to deal with it. So it's coming, whether you want to deal with it or not. And there have been some large shippers that have straight up told people to their faces that they don't believe that this is real and this is something that everybody's wasting their time on. And for that, I am very sorry for them, because they are going to be in a very difficult position for the future. And that is not something that's going to be helpful for them to survive strategically. So if you have nothing, maybe just do some Googling, figure out what you can. And it gets scary, but don't worry, there are a ton of people who have the resources, the tools out to help you, and just give them a call. More often than not, they're happy just to chat, and you don't have to necessarily buy their services, but just start, just start a little bit. And if you don't have a recycling bin in your office, maybe today's the day that you get one.
The future is certainly coming, and got to be ready for it there as well. Mary, obviously you've got the show coming up later today and the newsletter. Can you tell us a little bit how to access those?
Yeah, just keep watching FreightWaves here on YouTube, and you'll come across the show at 12:30 Eastern. And then if that's not enough, just hang around 2 o'clock. There's a newsletter coming in hot to your inbox.
All right, Mary, thank you for joining us. We'll catch you on the show later on this afternoon. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this.